Hey, what's up, everybody? BDO44 coming at you with another video. All right, so I did a little homework on the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Denver Nuggets because those teams are going to be starting their series up tomorrow. And, Minnesota and Denver split the season series. I think 3 out of those 4 games, Carl Anthony Towns did not play. In the one game he did play, he had like 22 points. I think that was like the first matchup they played with one another early in like January or something like that. Not really sure. Forgot. It might have been January or November 11 or 1. I don't remember what it said, but it was early in the season. And, when I look at the matchups, what comes to mind is just, the contrast for Denver specifically from where they were seeing a Laker team that didn't have a whole lot of size other than Anthony Davis to really throw at them. We were putting people like Rui Hachimura, and we were reluctant to play our center, Jackson Hayes, and that was something they were able to take advantage of on the board, specifically with their three-headed monster in the front court, Porter, Gordon, and Jokic. They were able to really rebound the ball a lot on us. That's not something I see them being able to do against Minnesota at all. With Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid. They got plenty of size in Minnesota, and I do believe that easy buckets is going to be a real thing for this series. Another thing that's going to be interesting in this series is defense. The Lakers played solid defense. The Minnesota Timberwolves are expected to play fantastic defense. So some of those easy plays that they were able to get off, some of the stuff that Denver was able to do, in theory, should not be able to be done. Some of the advantages they're used to being able to impose on the Lakers should not be able to be done against the Minnesota Timberwolves. Jokic is going to have a harder time going against Rudy Gobert and Karl Towns with the size, and all of those guys should make things a little more difficult for him. Jamal Murray, he's going to have to deal with a smart point guard, man. He's going to be dealing with smart point guards down there. Mike Conley. He's gonna make him work on both sides of the floor. He can also make big shots. He's also someone who's been around for a long time, who's known for having good conditioning. So that's gonna be an interesting matchup there. Both similar size, but I think Murray probably has the size advantage on Conley. But I think Conley can make him work on the other end as well. Just play smart overall. Anthony Edwards, man. Let me see. Trying to figure out, they would have loved to have had Bruce Brown in this series. The Denver Nuggets would, because without Bruce, it's going to be an interesting way forward for them to try to guard that man. KCP is going to be on that assignment there. I think Christian Brown will probably get some of that matchup as well. Ant-Man should, in theory, be able to run past those guys. It shouldn't be a problem for Ant. I know how good KCP is defensively, but I don't want to underestimate what Ant-Man's doing, especially with the rhythm that he's been in these playoffs. I'd imagine he's going to average over 25, 28 points a game, somewhere in there. KCP can make him work, though, and make him, have to guard him on the perimeter on the other side. KCP's a very athletic player. We'll see what type of matchup that looks like there. I think that could be pro Ant-Man for sure. But I do like the strength of a guy like Christian Brown to put on Ant if you have to. I love that they have Jaden McDaniels in Minnesota for Porter. The Lakers had real trouble trying to guard Porter. Sometimes we put Braun on him. Sometimes we put someone smaller on him. We tried Dinwiddie. Just a lot of stuff that really just didn't match up. I think when you consider the Lakers didn't have Vanderbilt, that would have been probably his assignment, but he never was available for us in the playoffs. So McDaniels is the player that they're going to put on him, and I like that. Not only that, but McDaniels has found his offense, so he's going to put a lot of pressure on Porter and those guys to try to guard him. And that's really been like manna from heaven for the Minnesota Timberwolves, the fact that he's been finding his offense. Now, I said this about both teams. They're going to have to play better than they did in their previous matchups. Neither one of those opponents that they went up against were preparing them for what's ahead. Jokic, it's a far cry from Nurkic, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. The Suns being the last team that the Timberwolves had to play. They were able to sweep the Suns, take advantage of the fact the Suns did not have a legitimate point guard out there. That they were running shooting guards as their point guard. Bradley Beal was pretty much a non-factor in that series, blah, blah, blah. So, it's a far cry. The Minnesota Timberwolves dealt with a team that kind of just really shot between two guys, and KD and Devin Booker. Just the ball just kind of goes into their hands and they work it. With the Denver Nuggets, the ball's everywhere at all times. And we know how efficient Denver can be, especially down the stretch of basketball games. Porter's coming off one of the best series of his career against the Lakers here in that first round. He was just really spectacular, and I'd imagine that McDaniels-Porter matchup will be one to pay very close attention to, because if Porter continues to shoot like that, it definitely gives the edge to the Denver Nuggets. Jokic is going to be Jokic regardless, but Gobert is one of the best defensive players out there, so we know that if anybody's going to give him trouble, it would likely be the length and the height of Rudy Gobert. Who's going to make him work, though? Gordon. That's what I'm looking at there. The Gordon matchup. He's had a phenomenal advantage against the Lakers, being able to rebound over everybody we put in front of him except for Anthony Davis. That should not, in theory, be something that he's able to benefit from. Now, we know Karl Anthony Towns is not the most physical center, but his height's going to allow him to get to boards probably much more. I would tell Karl to crash the glass in this series. Obviously, Rudy Gobert is going to get his handful, but if Karl can average double-digit rebounds in this series, it'll go a long way in helping his team against this Denver Nugget team that does crash the glass pretty good. Peyton Watson coming in off the bench, he's going to be very important for the Denver Nuggets. If he's hitting his corner three and offsetting some of what is coming off of the bench for the Minnesota Timberwolves, that'll be great. Naz Reid on the other end, massive importance in this series. If he can play like he plays against the Lakers, Minnesota probably win the series. That's how deep this is. He is the X factor for Minnesota every time he steps on the floor, because if anybody gets in foul trouble and he comes off the bench playing like an all-star, Minnesota's practically unbeatable. That's the reality of it. Practically unbeatable when Naz Reid is playing that great. I look at a guy like Monte Morris, who used to play for the Denver Nuggets. I think he's going to have a heightened motivation to try to beat this team, having played for them before. So I'm going to be paying attention to him. He's been playing pretty good as of late. Kyle Anderson, can his corner shot fall? It didn't fall in the last series. It hadn't been falling very much. He's been kind of all over the place. You're not really sure what you're getting out of him sometimes, but when he's at his best, he can fill up the box scoring pretty much everywhere. So I'm looking at him versus guys like Christian Braun, who I said is a good defender, strong player, can attack the rim, but really hasn't really found his offensive game as of yet. Missed a lot of corner shots against the Lakers. We could pretty much leave him from behind the arc and feel better about our chances. So that's kind of what was our strategy with the Lakers. You could leave him alone. Reggie Jackson, is he fully healed from that hamstring that he had? Because in that game 5, I believe it was, he was on fire. He looked great out there. You didn't see any remnants of that injury at all. Same with Jamal Murray. I'd imagine with the rest between the last time they've played and tomorrow, I think that both of those guys are a good bet to be better as far as their health is concerned. So, yeah, this matchup is intriguing, man. Jokic is going to do what Jokic does. I expect phenomenal numbers from him. I expect big games. Obviously, I mean, MVP several times over. But Ant-Man, with the way he's going about getting himself going, the way he played against the Suns, if he stays in that rhythm, boy, is he going to be a powerhouse to try to deal with. Like I said, KCP is a fantastic defender. When I think about some of the best role-playing defensive shooting guards in the world, KCP and Bruce Brown are the first ones to come to mind for me right away. Of course, Bruce is somewhere in Minnesota, in Toronto. His season is over, but they still have KCP and Christian Brown. Those guys are going to have to D up strong against Ant-Man. And I just don't know if he doesn't just completely outclass them anyway. Because one of the things that KCP had on us was athleticism. Our guys weren't very athletic. Talking about Austin Reeves, he's had some athleticism, but we're not talking about that type of athleticism. We're talking about Ant-Man. We're talking about probably the most athletic shooting guard on the planet right now. So when you consider, someone who's able to outspeed and out race a guy like KCP, it kind of takes away that advantage that Denver has on a lot of teams when they have shooting guards matchups. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see what KCP, the vet, is able to kind of do against Ant-Man, who has very little playoff experience, even though he's playing so well. Is there a way they can out-savvy him and kind of force him into some bad shooting nights or force him into some foul trouble or something? I think that'll go a long way in Denver getting out of this series. They're going to really need Ant-Man to not beat Ant-Man. You know what I mean? They need that. But, as I look at these two teams, their benches, neither one of their benches are overly fantastic, but I don't see a Naz Reid on the Denver bench. That's what I don't see. They need Reggie Jackson to play great. They need Christian Braun to play great. They need, DeAndre Jordan, if he's going to come in to be productive. Christian Watson, Peyton Watson's going to have a great series because they don't have that sixth man of the year coming off the bench going absolutely loco. And it neutralizes your ability to free up the center position for Jokic to have free reins to go crazy. Now, I do believe Jokic will destroy Naz Reid. On the defensive end, Naz Reid should have no success. But the question is on the other end, is Naz Reid going to be stretching the floor with 4 and 5 threes, getting boards, pushing people around and making life a bit more difficult for the Denver Nuggets? And if the answer is yes, that could wear Jokic down some, going up against some 3 towers, and 2 of them stretch the floor. So the perimeter defense is going to be very important for the power forwards of the Denver Nuggets. With Naz Reid and Karl Towns out there, particularly trying to go up against 7'2" Karl Towns, who the heck is guarding him on the perimeter? Is that Peyton Watson? Are you going to have Gordon at 6'10" trying to go out there trying to stop that? I think this could be a big Karl Towns series. A very big Karl Towns series. If he's going for 40 points, Denver's losing. Like, they really need Karl Towns not to be supreme Karl, because he's going to have the advantage on everybody on the floor. Jokic ain't guarding him out there. Peyton Watson may be your best bet, but Peyton Watson ain't tall enough to get to the highest point with Karl Towns shooting the ball. Gordon, I don't see him being a perimeter defender like that. I don't think so. You could ask Porter to do it, but in this case, Porter is not even tall enough to deal with that. So that's where the advantage really is of the entire series, if you ask me, is Karl Anthony Towns' height and ability to stretch the floor. And if for some reason one of those 2 centers, Gobert and Karl, get in foul trouble, Naz Reid being able to come out there and stretch the floor, pulling Gordon and Watson and anybody else out to the perimeter, for where you'll have the ability for Ant-Man to drive straight to the rim. So it's going to get tricky for the Denver Nuggets, man. I don't like this matchup for the Denver Nuggets for that reason. I really don't. Most of those matchups, as I said, they didn't have to deal with Karl. I don't know who's guarding Karl, man. And the fact of the matter is, Karl is an all-star in this league. Sometimes he could be the problem out there when he's trying to do too much. But we've also seen him have a 70-point game this season. Like, if he steps into his best self, he can win this series for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he may have to. Execution is so very important anytime anybody goes up against Denver. We know how much of a killer Jamal Murray is. We know how much of a killer Jokic is. Porter, they're all fantastic last-second type guys. So I think that's where the edge is for the Denver Nuggets. A guy like Rudy Gobert, is he going to have games where he doesn't score at all? He only attempt 2 and 3 shots or something like that, 0 for 7 type of stuff. That's not really going to work. They're going to need him to get some of the easy buckets, and they're going to need him not to give away possessions being bad on the offensive end. Turnovers, stuff like that, because he's a fantastic defender, but what is good defense to a Jokic? You know what I mean? No one's guarding Jokic. So if you're going to be a net negative on the offensive end, and some of that for what you would expect him to do on the defensive end may be null and void. So they're going to need him to have his 15-point games, 20-point games, in my opinion, or they're probably going to have to get away from him And that's going to open up things a lot for the Denver Nuggets if they do offensively. So it's going to be tricky. Can they somehow get Gobert off the floor? That's the question for the Denver Nuggets. Can we get Gobert off the floor? And if so, when those two centers get on the floor, are they going to be stretching the floor in such a way that makes it difficult for us to guard them? It's a weird matchup if you're the Denver Nuggets, man. This is not the Lakers. You don't have the mental edge with my team, the Lakers, not believing they could beat them for most of the series, you know, and various different stuff we were having wigging out mentally. We don't have none of that going on with the Minnesota Timberwolves. You got one of the most confident basketball players who ever played this game on the other side of the Denver Nuggets in Anthony Edwards. His confidence is beyond anything. It's simply beyond anything. He always believes he can beat anybody on the basketball floor. And if he's playing his best, he usually does. And that's where we're at with him. So it's Jokic versus Edwards, man. That's what it really comes down to. Which one of these guys is going to be the bigger star out there? One would imagine it'd be Jokic. He's further along in his career. He has more attributes to his game. But Ant-Man can be explosive and deadly. And if he sees a few threes fall, he can hit 20 of them. His greatest game has yet to be played. And we're probably going to see it somewhere in these playoffs. So I just know Ant-Man is still a developing superstar. And as he continues to find who he is, he's going to become more and more efficient and much more difficult to guard. So I already know what we're in for. It's going to be an amazing series. I expect this thing to probably go about 6 or 7. And I really haven't made up my mind who I think is going to win the series. I'm leaning toward Denver because I just think at the end of the day, Denver has such an ability to execute so very well, and I don't think Minnesota down the stretch can do that. A lot of the complaint I've been hearing about Minnesota is their final minute offense, and that is where Denver has a superpower, is where Minnesota has a weakness. But as I tell everybody, a lot of what we've been assessing from Minnesota had to do with Karl not being on the floor. He missed a good portion of the second half of the season. If Karl's out there, which he will be, Denver is going to have to find a way to overcome the length and the size of those 7-footers, man. And they have a 3-headed monster at that center position. And Denver is not used to dealing with a team like that in these playoffs. Absolutely not. We had nothing like what Minnesota's putting on the floor. Not to mention that we didn't have centers that were stretching the floor either. They have 2 of them in Nas and Karl. So I don't know, man. I don't know. If Minnesota can overcome close game situations down the stretch of a basketball game from game to game, they may be able to beat the Denver Nuggets, man. Because Denver has not been tested at all. I don't think the Lakers did a whole lot of testing at Denver at all. We led in games, but we wigged out. So we gave those games back. And Denver didn't really play their best, I think, because of it. Jamal Murray did not have a great shooting series. I don't expect him to shoot that poorly against Minnesota. I really don't. I think he's going to snap out of that. Especially after hitting those 2-game winners. You would think he shot very well in the series, but he actually shot extremely poor. Here's the thing that concerns me about the Denver Nuggets. They really did have deficits for the majority of the series. It's that stat going around the Lakers want, or up in like 150 minutes total or something like that, and the Denver Nuggets were only up for like 60 minutes total in the series. Denver found a way to win the games in spite of that, and you could say that's a plus, but they really did not, throughout the meat and potatoes of each game, dominate the Lakers, who they had a mental edge over, who they did have the size advantage over, who they did have the talent advantage over. Some of that is not going to be an advantage for them against Minnesota. Now, they do have altitude working in their favor. Obviously, the series starts in Denver. So that, we got to wonder how guys like Karl and Rudy are going to play in altitude. I don't really worry too much about that when it comes to Ant-Man, but you never know. But I'm going to be paying attention to the Minnesota Timberwolves and how they react to them first 2 games. If they drop those first 2 games in altitude, the series is probably going to go Denver's way in like 5 or 6. But if Minnesota can steal one of them games, this is going to be a very long series. A very long series. So that's going to be key. Minnesota has to come out and try to steal the early altitude game. One of those 2 early altitude games, they must get the split. This is a very, very serious home court advantage with Denver off the strength of that altitude alone. So if you don't get one against them early, you probably sealing the deal on your fate if you're Timberwolves. So that's what we're going to pay attention to. Can the Timberwolves jump out early on a Denver Nuggets team that has not been playing at a very high level for the majority of the games they've played in? They really haven't. They could have lost all those games if my team was a little more confident and had that piece in there that could give ourselves the size on the boards. Minnesota has that piece. So it's going to be a question of can they take advantage. Ant-Man can get to the rim against this Denver team. They didn't stop Bron from getting at the rim at all. And Ant-Man and Bron pretty much should be able to be comparable in some ways when it comes to driving at the rim. Obviously, Bron is much better at finishing at the rim, but the point is from point A to point B, you can count on both of them to cut through your offense, cut through your defense to get to the rim if you're the Denver Nuggets. So the Denver Nuggets are going to have to be more intent on rim protecting in this series. And then with their hands full from behind the perimeter with those bigs, it's going to be even more difficult. So that I think from a schematic standpoint, based on what I'm seeing in my head, Denver really is at a disadvantage. They're going to need Gordon to do a great job on Karl Anthony Towns. And maybe he does. Gordon has tended to reach a higher expectations than what you expect and from matchup to matchup. So if he can put a lot of pressure on Karl and get him in foul trouble, expose Naz Reid and then force Naz Reid to try to guard Jokic, for which Jokic will have great success, I think that's the best bet for the Denver Nuggets to try to expose that. Get Gobert off of the floor. Try to play Gobert off of the floor. Now I mentioned DeAndre Jordan, but he's really going to have trouble with those floor spacing bigs. He can really only play portion of a time in this series, so I expect to not see a whole lot of him. Probably more Peyton Watson out there. I expect to see a lot of Peyton Watson. If I'm the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm going to try to take advantage of any time I see Justin Holiday step on the floor. He can tend to hit shots here and there, but he's probably the weakest link on that bench of the players that they like to use in rotation. He's probably the weakest one. So you got to try to take advantage of him. Peyton Watson, as I said with the Lakers, you want to try to take advantage of him as well because he doesn't really have a whole lot of experience, but I will say he's played a lot better than I expected him to. Obviously, he's a shot blocker, and his three-point shot has been pretty solid. So you got to be careful with Peyton Watson if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves. He's somebody who's going to be out there a lot. Jordan McLaughlin, I don't know if they're going to use him very much. They didn't use Miller at all. The Minnesota Timberwolves didn't. I think that was a mistake. They should have probably worked that kid into the equation. He's a much more of an early season. He's an early career contributor that didn't get any playing time, Leonard Miller. I know he could have contributed. His game fits the hustle plays and that 50-50 ball stuff, and they just never gave him an opportunity. Sort of like the Lakers did with Max Christie. I think it was a mistake not playing Leonard Miller at all this year. If they would have played him all season long, I think he would have been a massive contributor to these playoffs for the Minnesota Timberwolves. These are things that come to mind, man. At the end of the day, this matchup is tricky. You expect Denver to just be the best team overall. You expect them to hit the big shots. You expect them to overcome anything and everything. But that is a lot of size in Minnesota, and that is a monstrous kid in Anthony Edwards. And when you talk about guys like, when you talk about guys like Mike Conley, who's an X factor, you don't know if he's going to give you 7 points. You don't know if he's going to give you 25 points. If he's somewhere in the 25 range, that's very difficult to deal with. When it's playoff time, you expect Mike Conley to elevate his game. He's the D'Angelo Russell. You know what I'm saying? Going up against D'Lo, it's like, you expect him to lower his game to a degree. You can't take any plays off with Mike Conley on the other end of you. So, these are things I'm paying attention to. I think the Denver Nuggets are a slightly less deep team. I think I like Minnesota's bench a little bit better just off the strength of Naz Reid alone. I do for sure. But late game execution, I have to lean with the Denver Nuggets. Until Minnesota proves to me that they can execute with the Denver Nuggets, I'd have to assume that the Denver Nuggets are going to be the team that executes better. So, as I give this some thought, the Karl Anthony Towns factor is key. If Karl can be elevated, great Karl, Minnesota is going to win the series. If Karl Anthony Towns is average or his normal self, I think Denver wins the series. They're going to need Karl, with all the advantages that he's going to have with his matchup, to elevate to a superstar level and execute extremely well down the stretch of these basketball games, particularly from behind the arc in the final 6 minutes. If he could hit his shots and continue to make life difficult for Gordon and Jokic, try to pull these centers out to the perimeter, create more lanes for his guards, I think that's going to go a long way in Minnesota having opportunities to win these close games. I do believe some of these games will be close. I don't think you could pull away from Denver for too long without them going on these spurts, these runs that are just inevitable. And how does Minnesota withstand those runs? They're a fairly young team, even though you got you got Rudy and guys like Conley down there for your veteran leadership. At the end of the day, you're being run by Ant-Man and Cat, and you just have to wonder if their lack of experience in the playoffs is going to ultimately hurt them against the defending NBA champions. Health is obviously important. That could throw everything off. If the wrong person gets hurt, anything could change in the situation. And playoffs are playoffs, for a reason. You play the same team over and over again, get a chance to look at one another, et cetera, et cetera. This could be a good coaching situation too. You got to look at Mike Malone. It's probably see the edge there, because their coach on the Minnesota Timberwolves in the final game did in fact hurt his knee. So I don't know what his availability will be for this series. Did he need surgery? I haven't heard any follow-ups on that. So I'm not sure if the Minnesota coach will even be out there for the beginning of this series. I'd imagine he'd come back at some point, but that's going to be a real thing, man. Will he be himself? Or will he even be out there? So that's something I have to take into account as I work my thoughts. At the end of the day, I just trust the Denver Nuggets execution. Even though the Denver Nuggets are going to have to play better against the Minnesota Timberwolves than they did against the Lakers, I do believe the Denver Nuggets are capable of elevating their game from where they are. They're an extremely explosive team with those runs. As I mentioned, anytime you go on a drought, they go on a run. It's one of the greatest things that I've seen a team do. It's they identify when you're struggling, and that's when they start playing their best ball. That's when they start running their best stuff. Minnesota is going to go on scoring droughts. They're known for it. If that happens in any of these games, if they don't withstand that, they're going to lose that game. So if that happens for 4 games straight, Minnesota's getting swept. And when I see that, when I think like that, in my mind's eye, especially with Denver having the home court advantage, I don't really see anything that Minnesota can do to where I would ever say that about Denver. I don't think Minnesota has that thing that if this happens every game, they could sweep the Denver Nuggets. So ultimately, even with the size advantage, even with the better bench, it's hard for me to see in my mind's eye the Denver Nuggets not somehow elevating to overcome the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're going to elevate to overcome them somehow. But they are at some disadvantages that are extremely glaring to me. And particularly with size and having to guard the perimeter with those bigs. And trying to stop Ant-Man from driving at the rim repeatedly. Jaden McDaniels is going to be so very important, though. He's going to have to fight around a lot of screens, stay out of foul trouble, hit his threes, etc. He's going to be a real X factor for the Minnesota Timberwolves as well. If he could do a fantastic job and do a much better job against Portland than the Lakers did, I think it'll go a long way in helping Minnesota keep this series alive. He's going to have to continue to elevate like he did against KD. It's a tough series, man. It's a tough series. But I'm going to go Denver in 6. If Minnesota had home court advantage, I'd feel so much better about that. But the fact of the matter is, Minnesota has to start this series in altitude. And I don't love that for them. I think home court really is what it comes down to for me. Not as much as matchups as it just does the damn altitude. And it's a real thing. Especially for guys like Rudy Gobert, bigger guys, Naz Reid. I just don't know if they're going to be able to react as well to that as they're going to need to against this highly effective and highly efficient basketball team that seems to find ways of elevating their game. So yeah, that's where it feels safe to be. I do see some advantages for Minnesota, but I just don't feel good about going against Denver. Not really. Not. They got the heart of a champion. They got two of the best killers ever. They got the best player on the floor, best player in the game, really, in Jokic. And after what I just saw Murray do to my team, it's hard for me to bet against him right now. Really, against anybody. So that's what I want to say, man. Denver in 6. I'm going to run with Denver in 6. As a Laker fan, I'll be happy to see Minnesota win the series. But then again, if Boston's going to be on the other side, I trust Denver to beat Boston. So I'm kind of, it really does come down to the Lakers not being out there, but still having their interests wrapped up in my head. Don't want to see Boston get championship number 18 over us, and I expect Denver would be the only team that could really beat Boston, to be honest with you. So that's really a thing. That's really a thing. Kind of want Denver to get to the finals just so they can beat Boston. But if Boston ain't there, then who cares? You know what I mean? That's what it really comes down to. But I expect Boston to be there. So that's really where my head is, man. Good luck to both teams. Stay healthy. I won't be upset if Minnesota wins this series, not by any stretch of the imagination. And I am picking Denver in 6. So that's pretty much what I got to say. My name is BDF44. I thank y'all for watching. I'm out.